Welcome to the fourth Hayley-Roxanna Crafts quick cross stitch video, where I share information, hints and tips on one area of cross stitch in a short video. In this video I am focusing on separating stranded cotton. So the most common thread used in cross stitching is stranded cotton like this. There are different brands available. This one is a DMC stranded cotton, and each of the different colours have different numbers on them so that you know which colour is which. Sometimes this thread can be referred to as floss. It's a personal preference thing, it's whether you call it thread, floss, embroidery silks. There's a few different names for them, but they're all the same thing. It's stranded cotton. And I tend to store my thread, I tend to call it thread, on bobbins like this. Just because I find it easier to work from these. It's a personal preference. There is lots of different ways you can store your threads. The important thing to know for this video is that stranded cotton, there are 6 strands. But it is very rare in cross stitching that you will actually stitch with all 6 strands at the same time. Most commonly 2 strands are used for cross stitches and 1 strand for back stitching. But this can vary depending on the look you or the designer is trying to achieve with the finished cross stitch. Before separating the strands, you need to cut the length that you want to stitch with from the full skein, from my bobbin in my case. So I usually go for about 50 centimetres. It's quite hard to see the full length in the video, about like that. But you need to go for what you're happy stitching with. You don't want it too long because it will knot up, but too short and you will have to thread up more often. So I just cut that off with a nice pair of sharp embroidery scissors, just so you don't make a mess of the ends. There are different ways of pulling the strands out. Some are easier than others. Again, it's a way of finding what works for you, your preferred way of doing it. I always start by giving the end just a little sort of fluff like that, just to help separate the strands out before I start trying to actually pull them apart, just so you can see each end. Then you can just grab one and you can literally just pull it apart like so. You can just keep going like that. I don't use this method. I used to, but I don't use it anymore, as I found I often got knots when trying to do this. So what I do now is I will grab one strand just between my thumb and forefinger, and then I will hold the rest between the other thumb and forefinger, just lightly. You don't want to be squeezing it too tight, because then when you pull, nothing's going to happen. So you just want to hold it lightly, and then I just pull up and away from the others. Rather than pulling it sideways, I pull it up. And the rest of the thread will bunch up a little bit, but you will find that it doesn't tend to knot. I very rarely get knots doing it this way. And as soon as that one strand pops out, the rest just returns to its normal state without any knots in. You can just smooth it back out quite easily. You then just repeat this process until you have the number of strands that you want to stitch with. So if I want 2, I will just do that again. So just grab hold of one of those strands, hold the rest very lightly between thumb and index finger, and then just give it a little pull up like so to pull it away. And then when you're ready to stitch, you just pop the 2 strands back together like so, and you're ready to stitch with them. You can thread them up or do whatever you need for stitching. If you just gently pull them to make sure that they're level before you thread them up. I don't recommend pulling more than one strand at a time, partly because that's when you tend to end up with knots, and also the actual strands will remain twisted as they are in the full strand, and so then the stitches don't look quite as neat and tidy in your finished cross stitching. If you have any questions about separating the thread, please pop them in the comments and I'll do my best to answer them. In next week's quick cross stitch video, I will demonstrate ways to thread your needle.